Pay attention to this grainy, black and white security recording. August 12th, 2017, Miller Park, Pennsylvania. From a high angle, the camera captures a scene that looks like the peak of a summer romance. The timestamp reads 2:15 a.m. You see Claire Bennett, a 21-year-old nursing student in a short dress, sitting on the lap of a man on a lonely park bench. They are kissing under the pale glow of a street lamp, completely lost in each other. It seems intimate, consensual, and safe. After a few moments, they stand up. The man takes her hand, and Claire smiles as she lets him lead her away from the light and into the deep, unmonitored shadows of the tree line. This footage is the last time Claire Bennett was ever seen alive. Before we unlock the truth behind this footage, comment down below, where are you watching this story from tonight? And please hit that subscribe button to join us for our next investigation.
The grainy, high-angle footage from Miller Park's security system offers a haunting, monochromatic window into the final hours of Claire Bennett's life. On that humid morning of August 12, 2017, the camera remains fixed, capturing a scene that, on the surface, looks like the peak of a summer romance. Under the flickering, pale glow of a street lamp, the 21-year-old nursing student is seen sitting on the lap of a fair-skinned man. She is wearing a light, sleeveless short dress, her hair pulled up into a tight, elegant bun that exposes the vulnerable line of her neck. The couple is lost in a world of their own, their bodies swaying in a playful, rhythmic motion as they share a series of deep, fervent kisses. To anyone watching this footage later, Claire looks radiant, seemingly unburdened by the world outside this small circle of light. After a few minutes of intimate whispers, the man stands, taking Claire's hand in his. They share a brief, joyous laugh before walking together toward the dense tree line at the edge of the park. As they step out of the frame and into the unlit, unmonitored shadows, the camera captures nothing but the empty wooden bench and the stillness of the Pennsylvania night. This would be the last time Claire Bennett was seen alive, a fleeting ghost in a digital archive. While Claire was losing herself in that moment of manufactured intimacy, a very different scene was unfolding 5 miles away in a modest, dimly lit kitchen. Martha Bennett sat at her table, the rhythmic ticking of a wall clock sounding like a countdown she couldn't stop. Her eyes kept drifting to the door and then back to the stack of papers spread before her, tuition notices for the upcoming semester that seemed more like ransom notes. Claire was the first in their family to pursue a professional degree, the shining hope of a household that had spent generations struggling in the local factories. But Martha had noticed a change in her daughter over the last few weeks. The breakup with her boyfriend of 4 years had left a hollow space in Claire's chest, a void that no amount of studying or shifts at the hospital could fill. Martha believed her daughter was out catching up with old friends, perhaps finally finding a reason to smile again. She didn't know that Claire had reached a breaking point where the weight of her family's expectations and the silence of her empty bedroom became too much to bear. The reality was that Claire hadn't gone out to celebrate. She had gone out to escape. The nursing student had spent her evening meticulously applying makeup, trying to hide the exhaustion of a girl who was drowning in debt and heartbreak. She had turned to a dating app not out of a desire for a relationship, but out of a desperate, impulsive need to feel something, anything, other than the crushing pressure of her own life. When she stepped out of her mother's house that night, she wasn't looking for a future. She was looking for a distraction. As the minutes ticked past 2 a.m., Martha felt a sudden chill, a mother's intuition, whispering that the silence from Claire's phone was no longer just a sign of a good time. She reached out to touch the cold surface of Claire's favorite coffee mug, unaware that at that very moment, her daughter was walking hand in hand with a stranger into the darkness of Miller Park. Meanwhile, a few blocks from the park, a lone patrol car cruised the quiet streets, the officer's headlights momentarily sweeping over the park's perimeter. Everything appeared normal. The town was asleep, tucked away under a blanket of summer heat, oblivious to the fact that a predator and his prey had just crossed the threshold of safety. The contrast between Claire's outward appearance of joy in the footage and the internal turmoil her mother was witnessing at home creates a devastating picture of a young woman caught between two worlds. Claire wanted to be the perfect daughter, the successful nurse, the reliable partner. But for one night, she just wanted to be a girl in a summer dress, forgotten by time and responsibility. Little did she know, the man whose hand she held so tightly was a shadow she would never be able to outrun. The arrival of dawn over Miller Park brought a cruel clarity that the grainy night vision footage had lacked. At approximately 6:30 a.m., a local jogger, accustomed to the peaceful serenity of the lakeside trail, veered slightly off the paved path near the thicket of trees where Claire had vanished hours earlier. There, partially concealed by the unkempt bushes and the long shadows of the rising sun, he stumbled upon a sight that would haunt the community for years. Claire Bennett lay motionless on the damp earth, her vibrant presence extinguished. The delicate, sleeveless dress she had worn with such hope was now tattered and torn, a silent witness to a violent struggle that had occurred in the pitch blackness. The earth around her was scuffed and disturbed, indicating her desperate fight for life against an overwhelming force. Most chillingly, the makeshift weapon remained at the scene. Claire had been strangled with her own elastic hair tie, the very one that had held her bun so neatly in place on the security footage. The mundane object, once a simple part of her morning routine, had been twisted into a tool of ultimate cruelty, leaving the young nursing student to be found by a stranger in the morning dew. While the park began to crawl with first responders and yellow crime scene tape, a different kind of quietude occupied a sterile, sun-drenched apartment on the outskirts of town. Liam Vance, a 28-year-old medical records clerk with a deceptively boyish face and soft features, moved through his morning with a rhythmic, almost ritualistic precision. To his co-workers, Liam was the epitome of the invisible man, quiet, efficient, and perpetually neat. Now he stood over his high-efficiency washing machine, meticulously pre-treating the fibers of the shirt he had worn just hours ago. He scrubbed at a nearly invisible smudge on the cuff with a focused intensity that bordered on the obsessive. Liam's life was a fortress of order, a necessary defense mechanism built against a chaotic past. As the water swirled, his mind drifted back not to the horror of the struggle, but to the overwhelming sense of control he had finally achieved. He looked at his hands, steady and clean, feeling a profound sense of release that he hadn't known was possible. This dark satisfaction was deeply rooted in a history of repressed rage. Liam had grown up in the shadow of a mother whose volatile beauty and erratic cruelty had left him scarred, a woman who, in the flickering light of his memory, looked uncannily like the girl he had just left in the dirt. For Liam, the act of violence wasn't merely a crime of passion, but a symbolic reclamation of power over the figure that had dominated his childhood. As he hung his damp clothes to dry, ensuring each sleeve was perfectly aligned, he felt no flicker of remorse or empathy for Claire. Instead, he felt a strange, terrifying peace. He brewed a fresh pot of coffee and sat by his window, watching the morning news sirens in the distance with a detached, clinical interest. In his mind, he wasn't a murderer. He was a curator of his own destiny, someone who had finally scrubbed a long-standing stain from his subconscious. The monster that his journals would later describe was currently eating toast, basking in the orderly silence of a job well done. The investigation into the death of Claire Bennett moved with a swift, digital efficiency that belied the brutality of the crime. By the afternoon of August 13th, detectives had scrutinized the grainy footage from Miller Park until their eyes burned, cross-referencing the man in the video, with his distinctive fair complexion and neatly combed hair, against the digital footprint left on Claire's phone. It didn't take long to find him. The dating app Connect held the chat logs, the profile photos, and the name, Liam Vance. When the summons was issued, the investigative team braced themselves for a chase or a confrontation, anticipating the nervous energy of a guilty man trying to run. Instead, Liam Vance walked into the precinct voluntarily, dressed in pressed khakis and a button-down shirt that looked as if it had just come from the dry cleaners. He didn't ask for a lawyer, nor did he fidget under the harsh fluorescent lights. He sat in the metal chair of the interrogation room with the posture of a choir boy, his hands folded politely on the table, looking at Detective Miller with an expression of helpful concern rather than fear, a mask of civility firmly in place. The interrogation that followed was a masterclass in manipulation, leaving the seasoned detectives unsettled. When confronted with the security footage, Liam didn't deny it. Instead, he smiled, a soft, wistful expression touching his eyes as if recalling a fond memory. "Yes, that was us," he admitted, his voice steady and calm, lacking the tremors of deceit. "She was a lovely girl. We had a connection, or at least, I thought we did." He recounted the evening with an eerie precision, describing the texture of the conversation, the shared jokes, and the intimacy of the kiss on the bench captured by the camera. He painted a picture of a romantic encounter that simply reached its natural conclusion. According to Liam, Claire had received a text that shifted her mood, and she decided to walk home to clear her head. "I offered to walk her," Liam said, meeting the detective's gaze without blinking, but she insisted on being alone. "I watched her walk toward the exit, and that was the last I saw of her." His narrative was seamless, devoid of the jagged edges that usually trap liars. He was polite to a fault, even offering to unlock his phone for them right there, confident that his earlier cleaning of the device was as thorough as his laundry. While Liam played the role of the grieving acquaintance in the interview room, a secondary team was digging into the bedrock of his history, looking for cracks in his pristine facade. At first, the search yielded nothing but accolades from a community that adored him. Neighbors in his quiet suburban cul-de-sac described Liam as the kind of young man who didn't exist anymore: polite, quiet, and reliable. Mrs. Higgins, an elderly widow living next door, told officers that Liam carried her groceries every Tuesday and shoveled her driveway without being asked. The local pastor at St. Jude's confirmed that Liam was a fixture in the pews every Sunday, a quiet soul who donated to the food drive and never caused a stir. He was, by all public accounts, a ghost of goodness. However, the deep dive into sealed records eventually unearthed a darker fragment of his past, a red flag that had been buried under bureaucracy. 3 years prior, a woman named Sarah had filed a restraining order against Liam, citing relentless stalking and veiled threats after a brief breakup. The police report detailed late-night phone calls where he would breathe silently into the receiver, and flowers left on her car with notes that read like eulogies. But the case had dissolved. Sarah had moved states, terrified and exhausted, and the charges were dropped for lack of concrete evidence. This discovery cast a sinister shadow over Liam's polite demeanor. The detectives realized they weren't dealing with a heat-of-the-moment killer, but a predator who had spent years perfecting the art of camouflage. The contrast was chilling. The man who sat calmly answering questions, sipping water from a styrofoam cup, was the same man who had terrified a woman into fleeing her home, and now, likely, the same man who had snapped a young nurse's life away in the dark. The sanctuary of the Bennett home had been breached, not by a physical intruder, but by the relentless, blinding glare of public scrutiny that followed the discovery of Claire's body. For Martha Bennett, the initial wave of community sympathy quickly soured into something far more toxic as the media narrative began to shift. The tabloids and local crime blogs, hungry for a sensational angle, turned their lenses away from the tragedy of a life lost and focused instead on the questionable choices of the victim. Headlines like "Late Night Rendezvous Gone Wrong" and "The Dangers of Dating Apps" splashed across screens, accompanied by pixelated images of Claire's short skirt and sleeveless top from the security footage. The implications were subtle, but devastating. She shouldn't have been there. She shouldn't have dressed like that. She asked for trouble. Inside the dimly lit living room, Martha sat curled on the sofa, clutching her daughter's pillow, her eyes red and swollen, as she doom-scrolled through the comments section of a news article. Strangers debated Claire's morality with cruel indifference, stripping the young nursing student of her humanity and reducing her to a cautionary tale. The weight of the victim blaming crushed Martha, exacerbating her grief into a paralyzing depression. She stopped eating, the silence of the house amplified by the accusing voices in her head. Every time she looked at the front door, she replayed the night of August 12th, torturing herself with what-ifs. If only she hadn't been so focused on the bills. If only she had heard the floorboards creak. If only she had forbidden Claire from using those apps. The guilt was a physical pain, a heavy stone sitting in her chest that made breathing a labor, convincing her that she had failed her primary duty as a mother, to protect her child. While Martha drowned in a sea of self-reproach, the architect of her misery was navigating the nights with a newfound, terrifying confidence. Liam Vance had begun to treat the investigation not as a threat, but as a spectator sport, where he was both the star player and the referee. Unable to stay away, he found himself drawn back to the perimeter of Miller Park in the dead of night. Standing in the shadows of the oak trees, just beyond the reach of the portable floodlights set up by the police, he watched the detectives comb through the grass and drag the lake with a sense of detached amusement. He observed their frustration as they came up empty-handed, searching for a weapon that wasn't there. A smirk played on his lips as he watched them bag irrelevant trash, knowing that the smoking gun, the elastic hair tie used to silence Claire, was sitting safely at the bottom of a storm drain 3 blocks away, where he had casually flicked it while walking home. The incompetence he perceived in the police force fed his ego, swelling his narcissism to dangerous levels. He felt untouchable, smarter than the badge-wearing officers, a phantom operator who had committed the perfect crime. This arrogance followed him back to his sterile apartment, where his obsession took on a digital form. Sitting in the glow of his computer monitor, the only light in the room, Liam logged out of his personal accounts and created a new persona. He chose a generic name, uploaded a stock photo of a landscape, and navigated to Claire's memorial page on social media. He scrolled through the tributes from friends and family, drinking in their sorrow like a vampire feeding on blood. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing a message that was chilling in its banality. Such a tragedy. She looked like an angel. Rest in peace, Claire. He hit enter, watching his words nestle among the genuine outpourings of grief. It was the ultimate power trip. To comfort the family he had destroyed. To exist in their digital space as a well-wisher while holding the secret of her final moments. This act of digital intrusion gave him a rush superior to any drug. It was a way to touch the crime again without getting his hands dirty. A secret wink to himself in the mirror of his own monstrosity. The sterile humming silence of the State Forensic Laboratory stood in stark contrast to the chaotic grief consuming the Bennett family. Yet it was here that the investigation finally found its voice. Dr. Aris, the lead pathologist, had spent hours analyzing the microscopic debris collected from Claire Bennett's body, frustrated by the lack of foreign biological material on her skin, a result of the killer's meticulous, almost obsessive cleaning of the scene. However, the one place Liam Vance had failed to sanitize was the space beneath his victim's own defenses. Buried deep under the fingernail of Claire's right index finger, encased in a microscopic ridge of keratin, was a minute fragment of skin tissue and dried blood. It was a tiny biological testament to Claire's final, desperate attempt to claw her way to freedom. When the DNA sequencing results populated on the monitor, the probability of a random match was 1 in several billion. The genetic profile belonged undeniably to Liam Vance. This was the smoking gun the detectives had prayed for, a direct biological link that placed Liam in a violent struggle with Claire, shattering his polite narrative of a consensual goodbye. But the investigators knew that to secure a conviction against a man as manipulative as Liam, they needed to dismantle his alibi with visual certainty, to show the jury the face of the killer in the immediate aftermath of the crime. Energized by the DNA match, the digital forensics team expanded their dragnet, moving beyond the immediate vicinity of the park to the surrounding transit routes. Their persistence paid off when they accessed the surveillance logs of a 24-hour gas station located 3 miles from Miller Park, on the route back to Liam's apartment. The footage, time-stamped at 3:45 a.m. on August 12th, just 90 minutes after Claire was last seen alive, captured Liam's sedan pulling up to a pump under the harsh, unforgiving glare of fluorescent overhead lights. As Liam stepped out of the vehicle, the high-definition camera mounted above the payment terminal revealed a man unraveling. He was no longer the composed, neat figure from the dating app or the police station. His shirt was partially untucked, and his movements were jerky and agitated. Most damning of all was the moment he leaned into the side view mirror to inspect his reflection. The camera zoomed in to reveal a jagged, angry red welt running vertically down the left side of his neck, a fresh, bleeding scratch consistent with fingernails raking across skin. The detectives watched in stunned silence as Liam touched the wound gingerly, his face twisted in annoyance rather than guilt. This explained the thick layer of concealer and the high-collared shirt he had worn during his voluntary interview. He hadn't just been hiding a blemish, he had been masking the physical brand of a murderer. While the forensic and digital evidence tightened the noose around Liam's neck, the emotional truth of that night emerged from the shadows of the park itself. A dedicated canvass of the area's transient population led detectives to a man named Elias, a homeless veteran who had been sleeping in a makeshift shelter near the lake's drainage outflow that night. Elias had been terrified to come forward, fearing he would be blamed for the crime, but the weight of what he heard had become unbearable. In a hushed, trembling voice, he recounted to the investigators that he had been woken not by screams, but by the sharp, indignant sounds of a woman saying no. Elias described hearing the couple's tone shift instantly from playful whispers to a tense confrontation. According to his account, Claire had discovered something disturbing about Liam's behavior as things heated up. Perhaps a boundary crossed, or a perverse request that shattered the romantic illusion, and she had attempted to stop the encounter. It was this rejection, this assertion of control by the prey, that triggered the metamorphosis. Elias described a guttural growl replacing the man's smooth voice, a sudden explosion of rage that turned a lover into a predator. It wasn't a crime of passion in the traditional sense, but a crime of ego. The monster inside Liam couldn't handle the dissonance of being denied, and he had extinguished Claire's life simply because she refused to play her part in his fantasy. The heavy oak doors of the county courtroom sealed the fate of Liam Vance on a crisp afternoon in late 2018, bringing a legal conclusion to a saga that had shattered the innocence of the entire community. Inside, the air was thick with a tension that had been building for over a year, a collective holding of breath as the jury foreman stood to deliver the verdict. Throughout the grueling trial, the prosecution had meticulously dismantled Liam's carefully constructed facade, presenting the DNA from under Claire's fingernail and the damning gas station footage as irrefutable proof of his monstrous duality. Yet, as the words, "guilty on all counts," rang out in the silent chamber, the man at the defense table remained chillingly unmoved. Liam Vance did not weep, nor did he rage. He simply blinked, his face a mask of bored indifference, as if the proceedings were a tedious meeting he was anxious to leave. When the judge, visibly struggling to contain his disdain for the defendant's lack of remorse, handed down the maximum sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole, Liam's only reaction was to calmly adjust the cuff of his shirt, ensuring it was perfectly aligned with his wrist. He offered no apology to the weeping Bennett family seated just a few feet away, nor did he acknowledge the life he had stolen. To the very end, he remained trapped in his own narcissism, viewing himself not as a criminal, but as a victim of bad luck and sloppy forensics. The most haunting moment of the trial, however, was not the sentencing itself, but the final viewing of the evidence that had started it all. The prosecution played the security footage from Miller Park one last time, the black and white video of Claire and Liam kissing on the bench. In the context of the verdict, the image had transformed from a scene of romance into a terrifying documentation of a trap springing shut. The jury and the gallery watched in silence as the couple walked hand in hand into the darkness, knowing now that the gentleman leading the way was already calculating exactly how to extinguish the light in Claire's eyes. That grainy footage became the enduring symbol of the case, a stark reminder that the face of evil often bears a smile and offers a warm hand to hold. Outside the sterile confines of the courthouse, the physical world was changing in response to the tragedy. Miller Park, once a place of shadowy corners and romantic seclusion, underwent a radical transformation. The city council, spurred by public outcry, installed high-intensity LED lighting that banished the night from every pathway and grove. The single low-resolution camera that had captured Claire's final moments was replaced by a network of high-definition surveillance units, turning the park into one of the most monitored spaces in the county. The wooden bench where Claire and Liam had sat was removed, replaced by a memorial garden, but the atmosphere of the park had shifted permanently. It was safer, brighter, and cleaner, yet it carried a scar that no amount of landscaping could cover. The locals walked through it a little faster now, their eyes scanning the tree line with a new, instinctive wariness. For Martha Bennett, the verdict provided justice, but not closure. That would come through action. Refusing to let her daughter be remembered merely as a victim of a date gone wrong, Martha channeled her grief into the creation of the Claire's Light Foundation. The organization launched a relentless campaign to educate young women about the dangers of modern dating, specifically the risks associated with meeting strangers from apps. Martha traveled to high schools and universities, standing on stages with trembling hands to tell Claire's story, dismantling the victim-blaming narrative that had nearly destroyed her in the months after the murder. She spoke of the red flags that are often masked by politeness, urging women to trust their instincts over their desire to be nice. The foundation lobbied for stricter background checks on dating platforms and created support networks for families of violent crime victims. Claire's story became a modern parable in the town, a grim warning passed down to a new generation. It served as a permanent reminder that the monsters of the world rarely look like monsters. They are the clean-cut men who open doors, who sit quietly in church pews, and who hide their darkness behind a perfect, polite smile until it is too late to scream. The story of Claire Bennett and Liam Vance leaves us with a haunting lesson that goes far beyond a single tragic night in Miller Park. It reminds us that evil does not always look like a monster. Sometimes it wears a polite smile, holds a steady job, and speaks with a gentle voice. The most dangerous predators are often the ones who have mastered the art of blending in, hiding their darkness behind a mask of normalcy until it is too late. For everyone watching, please take this message to heart. We live in a world where digital connection is easy, but true safety requires vigilance. Never let the desire for companionship silence your intuition. If something feels wrong, even if you cannot explain why, trust that feeling. It is better to be rude and safe than to be polite and vulnerable. Always let someone know where you are. Meet in public spaces, and never hesitate to walk away if the energy shifts. Your life is worth more than someone else's feelings. Please help us spread this vital warning by sharing this video with your friends and family. You never know whose life might be saved by a simple reminder to stay alert. If you want to see more stories that shed light on the truth, please subscribe to the channel and join our community. May God watch over you and your loved ones, protecting you from the dangers that hide in plain sight. Let us pray that every daughter, sister, and friend makes it home safely. Please type Amen in the comments below to show your respect for Claire and to affirm our collective prayer for safety and protection.